Welcome. This is the first chapter of the book, and it's an overview of randomized explanatory trials. The chapters have the same structure. They usually begin with a quote that I liked and thought you might enjoy it also. And then there's an outline of it with hyperlinks attached to the outlines so that you can hyperlink to any section you want. And then there's the actual text itself. Now, this chapter is an overview of randomized explanatory trials. When we do program evaluations, it's not enough in general just to say if a program has had an effect on an outcome or not. To me, what we need to say is if a program doesn't have an effect, why doesn't it have an effect? And what can we do to fix it? How can we improve it? And we want to do our evaluation so that we get feedback on that. As well, if a program does work and impact the outcome, the question is how can we make it better? How can we make it that much more effective? And that's what RETs are all about. Now, an RET is really nothing more than a randomized controlled trial, an RCT, with mediation and moderation in it. Of course, that's nothing new. The National Institute of Health and the Center for Disease Control and many other government agencies and state agencies have suggested how important it is to include the constructs of mediation and moderation in the research that we do in our evaluations. But it's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to actually do it and do it in a rigorous scientific way. That's what this book's all about, trying to give you the ins and outs of designing really strong randomized explanatory trials to give you insights into why programs work or why they don't work. Now, this chapter gives an overview of several steps and processes involved in a randomized trial, and the first one is what I call mediator mapping. So let me show you what I mean by that. So the first step in mediator mapping is to take your program and to do a very careful componential analysis of it to try and identify what each module within that program or each session or each component of the program is trying to change. And as you elaborate the variables that each component is trying to change, you're essentially identifying the mediators that the treatment is assumed to affect. What we want to do is to be able to get feedback ultimately on how effective a treatment is in changing each one of those mediators. And once we've identified the mediators, then we want to relate those mediators to the outcome and see just how important they are. The program designers obviously assumed that they were important, but maybe those assumptions are not correct. So any given mediational chain in an RET has two components to it. The first is, does the treatment in fact change the target mediator that it's trying to change? And if we find in our evaluation that it doesn't, then we need to go back and revisit what we're doing in the treatment that's targeting that mediator, and we have to improve it. We have to change it. We have to fix it because it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. We can then ask, does that mediator in fact impact the outcome? We might find that via our presumptions that it does have a good strong effect on the outcome, or we might find that the chain is broken here and that although we change the mediator, it doesn't really affect the outcome. And the idea is to go in and do a careful look at each chain and get feedback. If the mediator really isn't predicting outcome and isn't relevant to it, maybe we should drop that mediator and streamline the program. Why bother changing something that doesn't work? So we're very interested in both these links when we do our mediation analyses. This is a little different from traditional mediation analysis where the focus is on the omnibus effect of a given mediator on the outcome, and they get the overall product of coefficients effect, and they don't really focus on the individual links in the chain itself. An emphasis you'll see throughout this book is that I'm always trying to analyze specific information about the individual links within this. So I think that's usually more beneficial than focusing on the omnibus test, and I get into that later in the book. The chapter also discusses moderator analysis, and again, the idea is that your treatment may influence a mediator, which in turn influences an outcome, but that may not be true for everybody. There may be subgroups of the population that you're working with for whom things don't work. We want to know and get a sense of, does this treatment have the same effects for everybody, or are there subgroups for whom it's more or less effective? And that's the whole idea of moderator analysis. The way I approach moderator analysis is that a given moderator, like in this case biological sex, if you're male or female, that can render the treatment ineffective for a certain subgroup, depending upon where the moderation occurs. It might be that the treatment affects the mediator more so for males than it does for females. And so biological sex moderates this particular relationship. And if I find that's the case, I have to ask, well, why is this working better for males than it is for females? And what can I do to improve the program so that it has an effect on females as well? Another possibility is that biological sex doesn't moderate this, but that the importance of that mediator in shaping the outcome varies by biological sex. Maybe this mediator is very important for males, but it's not very important for females. As you get in and you look at these specific paths and the specific effects, you see in your program the subgroups who it's not working for, and you can find out exactly where the problem lies. And so that's the moderated analysis as well. A third component I discuss in the chapter is after you've identified your mediators and or moderators, it's very important that you think about the variables that you've left out and that aren't there. And I discuss in the chapter why that's important. Just to give one illustration, I might be interested in assessing the causal link between mediator 1 and the outcome. And I do that based in part on the strength of the association between these two guys. Well, if there's some variable outside the core system that is influencing both the mediator and the outcome, like gender or social class or ethnicity or whatever, then that's going to be a common cause of these two, and it's going to inflate the correlation between them. That the correlation between the mediator and outcome has two sources. It's due to the causal impact of mediator 1 on outcome, as well as the common cause of the covariate. And unless we specify these covariates and we control for them and remove their influence, we will make biased estimates of the effects of a mediator on an outcome. So we need to think very carefully about covariates that need to be modeled in the system for us to make accurate inferences. Sometimes we can't measure all those covariates and we can't statistically control for them to remove their influence. And then the unmeasured covariates are sitting in these disturbance terms here. These represent all other variables other than the three mediators that influence the outcome and that are unmeasured. And this represents all other variables that influence mediator 1 other than the treatment, but they're unmeasured. If gender is not measured and it's sitting in here and influences outcome, and if gender, which is unmeasured, is also in this disturbance term, then by definition these guys are going to be correlated. We want to think long and hard about the variables that are left out of the system. Another thing that's important, like this can be used as an index of the percent of variance accounted for by the three mediators in the outcome. If this is very large, that suggests there are a lot of other variables that are influencing the outcome other than these mediators. What are those variables and why aren't they in my intervention? Some of them might be unchangeable, very stable constructs that are resistant to change, but others might be changeable. As I think through the variables that are left out that are in this very large disturbance term, it might suggest to me other mediators that should be in the system. Another facet that I discuss in the chapter is the importance of thinking about the temporal dynamics, how long it takes for a change in the mediator to produce a change in the outcome, and how long it takes the treatment to produce a change in the mediator. Sometimes the change can be instantaneous, and the second you change the mediator, you'll change the outcome. If this is a belief and this is an intention to do something, often when you change the belief, it will almost immediately change the intention. But other times, it takes a while for this to translate into the outcome. So I really emphasize the importance of thinking about temporal dynamics as well. Well, you'll see all these other facets I think about. I talk about not only doing quantitative studies of RETs, but also doing mixed methods where you combine both a quantitative study and where you study your model using qualitative methods, and then you compare the results of those. I think overall there's some interesting concepts in the chapter that hopefully will get you thinking. And again, this is just a start that gives you kind of a broad overview, and then the remaining chapters kind of develop everything in more depth. Okay, thanks a lot.